Okay. So now that we have watched all the videos and did the readings on facilitated communication, I would like to see where each of you stand. So Megan, if you'd like to go first.
Okay, so I was given the pro position for facilitated communication, and basically facilitated communication can be a way for people who are unable to control their motor movements to be able to type in order to communicate via text. The idea is that the facilitator is providing support, whether it's by touching the shoulder, elbow, or hand to help control the movements of the individual, and then the individual would be the one that is actually doing the typing of the text. And the good thing about it is that it's allowing people who otherwise would be unable to communicate to have a way to communicate using a text application or a letterboard to make words and speak to people the way that we use words to speak to one another. Let me think, what else? The people that, when I was reading about it, that it seems to talk about the most would be individuals with autism who are unable to communicate and verbally, and the people with cerebral palsy and other similar disabilities that affect their communication. Yes, so I think that's it.
Okay, good.
So I just sort of I had the con, but I'm also very skeptical of it just myself after watching the videos and seeing the studies that were done, and how on so many occasions the facilitator saw a different picture than the person who needed communication assistance, and they gave different answers as to what they were seeing, and it was always the facilitator's picture. I just think that I think it's very telling of how it works for a lot of individuals. And I think also thinking back to the Anna and DJ New York Times article that we read for the last module, I think that there's just a lot of ethical questions that are brought into it, because I feel like there's just so much controlled by the facilitator, and there's so much technology available now that although facilitated communication may have been effective for people in the past, I think that it's really important to look into other modes of communication. I don't know. I really question it, because I think that there's just so many other ways you can get at communication, and there's so many ethical questions with this, and there's that huge question of if it's really that person speaking, and I think all of the studies that we saw in the videos showed that it was not that person speaking. So I really question it.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And I'm neutral, so I am looking at both sides of it, and I think if it's implemented correctly, then it may be effective. So the facilitator is supposed to just, support them physically, but they're not supposed to guide them at all. And the person also communicating must have understanding of spoken and written language. So if the individual does have, knowledge of spoken and written language, then I think the facilitator might not need to guide them as much. So if we looked at the videos, I thought the second video of Tim, he didn't have much guidance and support. So I do think he was communicating on his own, because the goal of facilitated communication is that they can communicate independently. Whereas the other video of Peter, I don't think he was even finished typing before the woman was speaking the words. So I don't think that was him communicating at all. So, I mean, I think if it's carried out the right way, then it might be effective, but most cases it's the facilitator guiding the communicator.
Yeah, I agree with everything everyone said. But Megan and Jessica and Mackenzie, you brought up some of the videos, some good points. Sorry, Megan, I'm cracking up at your dog right now.
That's okay. He is just not listening. Ask her.
So, yes, Mackenzie, you brought up one of the videos and where they did all those studies, and they showed the picture first to the facilitator, then to the the individual, the communicator, and how they did all these studies. And I think it was like out of 100 and like wrote down somewhere, 180 trials, not one was accurate out of 180. So, I mean, when I heard that, that is actually pretty scary. Some pretty scary findings. So I thought that was very telling of facilitated communication. Jessica or Mackenzie, Mackenzie, you might have brought this up too. The article that we had to read last or a couple weeks ago about DJ. Again, and they reported a lot of statistics and a lot of studies that were done. And it all comes down to pretty much like there's no evidence to support this. And the evidence that is, available shows that it's not, credible and not valid. So I think that says, with all the current studies, it says a lot. And Jessica, the videos too, I wrote down the same notes. The video, what I found to be interesting about the video, and I'm drawing a blank on his name, but the second one, when the guy was just like pressing the buttons and you said the girl was like speaking almost quicker than he was typing, I thought it was interesting that half the time he wasn't even looking at the board and he was just, looking elsewhere, laughing and all of that. And he was hitting it so quickly, and I just couldn't see how she could be following that. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was interesting.
And that kind of tied into the third video, how they said in order to type, you have to be looking at what you're typing, because the lady with typewriter, she was spelling everything wrong, and she wasn't looking. So I don't think in that video he was really typing.
I agree. And then even with video 3, what I found interesting about that was it seemed like the boy could, type on his own, that he didn't need any support. So I was a little bit confused as.
So this was the one where she had her hand on his shoulder and his leg?
The side and then his leg. It was like 3 locations that I kept switching between. And that was it was confusing a little bit because it seemed like he was doing it on his own, but then I started really paying attention to when she was like placing her hand on her hand on his shoulder, then on his waist, then on his leg, and it was confusing, and I just didn't understand why. Maybe she was cueing something on the keyboard, it kind of seemed like, but it seemed like he was pretty independent. So I was kind of confused by why she had her support was there.
So if you read in the description of the video, it explains that he was having more, I guess, of the facilitated communication where there was more support before, but he was able to progress to be independent in using it. However, it said because of his anxiety that he has when he's communicating, that he still uses the facilitated touch just for reassurance, to ease his anxiety. That's what the description said, which I thought was interesting because if you watched him, he was able to type himself. It wasn't like his hands were going there.
Right.
And putting your hand on his leg isn't going to help his arm.
Right.
But they explained that it was due to the anxiety of communication, which I thought was interesting as well.
Yeah, it is interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
Part of the definition for facilitated communication is they provide physical and or emotional. So that might have been more of the emotional side of facilitated communication.
right. Mhm.
For sure. And that was one of the videos, I guess, that would highlight, one of the few videos that would highlight the side with the pros more than the cons, because it showed that he progressed into being able to do more, whereas the others, they were still continuing to be facilitated. So it's not as clear. But I felt like that one was the most clear for a
Right.
pro for facilitated communication.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
don't know. I mean, as special ed teachers, we're totally data driven. And so just hearing all of the statistics and hearing all of the numbers and watching it, it's so hard for me to think that this is a very valid form of communication. I keep getting caught up on the fact that, okay, this may have been in a time when there were fewer resources for people with serious motor difficulties, for them to be able to communicate. But now I think there are so many ways people and so many different forms of assistive technology that people can access that lead to more independent communicating. And so to me, to continue to use facilitated communication now is almost like,
Yeah.
let's explore something else too. Maybe that emotional piece might be important. It is, but I'm a con, so it might be important. But also, I don't know. I feel like the goal is independent, authentic communication, and I just don't know how authentic it was.
I agree. And two comments that were made in the last video that kind of stood out to me and things that I've thought about all along was, how do these individuals, just teach themselves how to read, write, spell? Those are all the prerequisites needed. You need to be able to read in order to make full, complete sentences. So that stuck out to me. And I think one other thing was that, going back to several of the videos, or at least two of them, when the individual wasn't even looking at the board and was kind of looking up at the ceiling and, anywhere but the board. So those are two things that really stuck out. And of course the studies, those are a couple of things that really stood out to me. But, all right, guys, we're at about a minute left. So anything else?
Oh, maybe. I felt like it's really hard holding the pro position. Like I'm keeping my mouth shut to stay on my area. But yeah, like I felt like the videos were very like, okay, like maybe it's not really a thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think we all agree that there obviously evidence shows that it's probably not the most effective way for individuals.
I read an article and it was written by one of the facilitators, and she had actually alleged that the communicator was abused, and they found out like she was the one that was doing everything, and like she reflected on it and said it's awful and like she would never do it again. So I found that very interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I know I've read something similar. And there was, to wrap it up, one comment that I think a psychologist made in the last video, just saying that, facilitated communication almost makes these people that they're working with who they want them to be, rather than letting them just be themselves and who they are. So, all right. Is that it, guys?
Yep.
Yes.
All right. I'm going to stop the video.